Okay, thanks, Gary. Welcome, everybody. This is kind of our second webinar for the finance group specifically, and with Don Green here, since he's the head of the business process automation group, SIG, we'll include him as well. But we did a webinar on F9 a couple months ago, and it seemed to go very, very well. And it's kind of a question and answer, and we had somebody from Infor kind of give a little demo, and then a lot of questions were answered. So I saw a few kind of questions and comments pop up on APEI probably about a month ago, and I thought that we should probably do another webinar of this type. So if you get a lot of value out of this, let me know, let Gary know, and we'll try and do more of these in the future. Today we've got Sally Main. She's from Infor, and she's kind of their APEI expert, so she's going to walk us through a little demo, I believe, on 10.1, which she's assured me is the same functionality for all previous versions. And then Don Green here is also here. He's going to show us how Choctaw uses APEI. He's got some Q&Ds that he does and some kind of neat stuff that he's figured out. So he's going to share us some of their tips and tricks. And then if you have any questions, feel free to chat those over to me. And when they're done giving their demo, I'll ask the questions, and they will do their best to answer them. So Sally, I'll turn this over to you.
I think we'll actually see something. I don't know how that works.
Sally, can you hear?
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
You have to.
Can you see me?
No, that's good, so they can hear us. We don't want them to hear us.
Well, I can hear somebody talking besides me.
Yes, we can.
So can you guys? You can see my screen? Okay, great. So this is obviously graphical. We are working on a new AP Invoice Center. We're going to not use the same letters when we speak of it, APEI. We're going to call it something different just so that we're clear for Hotline and so forth what you're using. But they're trying to improve some of the keystrokes of the AP Invoice Center as it exists today in GUI as we move it to Web UI. It's not quite done yet. It's pretty close. So this presentation is being done in graphical because that's the only release I can really use at this point. It's good. The concept is going to be the exact same thing regardless. Keystrokes will be a little different. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to walk us through some entries and try to kind of show you in a couple places where it's different and better than AP entry. Those of you that are on character, you have some of the similar concepts and functionalities in the character version. It's under like APEB something, I think. So it's under your batch entry sections in character. But in graphical, we only really have AP entry and then now this guy. We kind of cleaned up what character was doing, the overall concept. So when I come into this center, I start with a group name. The concept is that once established, that group name will probably be reused on a daily basis. So each of your AP clerks might have their own group name, and they'll just reuse it for a couple reasons that we'll see in just a minute. But to do this real quickly, I'm just going to go ahead and do an entry. You can see here that the invoice type is here, processing type, which may be new to some of you, but that's a field that's been added to the vendor setup screen, I think around the 6.0 release, just to make sure that I don't fumble and do an expense when I'm not supposed to. Then I'm going to go ahead and do an invoice number. I'm going to do dollar amount. Somebody's talking. Female is talking that we can hear. Okay, so then I'm just going to go ahead and put in the date, press enter, and it moves me forward. Now I have set this up to mimic how AP entry is going to look, APET, so it's very comfy for us. What you'll see is that there's a whole bunch of different views down the left-hand side of the screen, and they're just different pieces to the puzzle, but we don't have to stop and visit each one. Now in this case, I'm looking at the add-on screen. I could go ahead and enter an add-on if that was appropriate. In my case, it's not. I'm just going to blow on through the screen there, and then I'm going to go ahead and call up a purchase order. Now, one of the big differences here is notice the stage of the PO. I didn't bother to print my PO since it wasn't really going anywhere in my demo world, but the point is this PO is not yet received. You cannot do a three-way match in AP entry if the PO is not yet received. So that's one big difference that the Invoice Center gives us. Now what we'll also see is it's telling me at the bottom of the screen right now that my PO costing proof is off by $10. What that means is when it goes ahead and extends the 3 line items that are on here, quantity of 10 for each of them, $5 a piece. I make life real simple. That's $150, but yet the vendor is charging me $160. And in my case, what it's actually, when I look closer at this invoice, it's because he's charging me $6 a piece for this first item. Now again, I change the screen, I enter that information, my PO costing proof is 0. So a couple other big differences on the screen. First of all, you'll see that right next to each other, you don't have to toggle back and forth, are product and vendor products, so they're right next to each other. Keep in mind this is graphical, so I can move columns around. I can put them in any order that I want to. Then the other overall concept that's different is in APEI, if I had this difference. If changing the screen in APEI says the vendor is right, I am going to pay him $160. In the Invoice Center it says, this is what I see, I am
Hey, Sally, I can't hear you anymore. I can see your screen, but I can't hear you. Kelly, are you still here? Don, are you here?
I'm here.
Okay.
Okay, I'm back. I'm back. I don't know what happened. Can you guys all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm all plugged in. Everything is fine. I don't know what happened. Okay. So what I was getting at is an accounts payable entry. If I change the dollar amount in the screen, that is telling the system, vendor must be right. Go change inventory control. That's not the concept that we're using in the Invoice Center. What the Invoice Center is doing is actually indicating that this is what I see, not necessarily that it is right. I'm going to do a real quick expense entry here just to show you that it's really quick and easy. 070114. I get a GL screen, which I can go ahead and adjust. So now I've got 2 transactions in this file. Another big difference here is this is a batch file. At no point did you see a GL screen open up. So therefore, until such time as I say that I am ready to post, then it's not ready to post yet. And so I could save my work. I could go ahead and say, well, you know what? There's this really large invoice PO match that I'm in the process of. On my screen, I'm afraid to touch any buttons because I don't use this GoToWebinar meeting that often. So I can't see it, but you might be able to. Is over here on the right, there's a suspend question that you never see in AP entry because it's not appropriate. And what it basically means is that I could suspend this combination. I can recall transactions. It's a batch file. So, you know, if I'm working on a very big match and I'm not done and I have to leave, in APEI, I have to cancel my work and start over tomorrow. With the Invoice Center, I basically just say, well, that combination I'm not done with, so let me go ahead and save it and call it up tomorrow. Now, I'm going to go back and call up another PO here, add another PO, 100-9268. Okay, now I have 2 POs. These are both received, but one of the other big differences, kind of the clunkiness of APEI, is that if you have multiple POs, what do you have to do today? You go back and forth, trying to see, you know, okay, there's 6 lines on the invoice. Oh, line 1 is from the first PO, line 2 is from the second PO. But again, with the Invoice Center, everything appears on one screen, so hopefully it makes our life easier. Now, in this case, my PO costing proof is 0. I press enter, and off I go. So my job as the AP entry person is to make the screen I'm looking at, invoice entry here, equal to the paper. We're mimicking EDI. That's what EDI does. An EDI process doesn't call you at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, hey, Kelly, we're off by $1. What do you want me to do? It just posts what it sees, and then what's the next step? It does what's called a tolerance check. So I'm going to highlight all 3 of those transactions. The expense one will slide through no problem, as will the last one we did for $310 because there was nothing wrong with it. I'm going to do a final update, which now we finally see the GL screen. I'm going to say go ahead and update. Now notice, just as a by the way, something we've added recently, receive direct order POs. That's pretty cool. That means once you upgrade to a current release, you will no longer have to go to PO receiving to receive a direct order PO. As part of the Invoice Center, you'll just check that box and it will automatically receive a direct order PO and then carry on. Okay, so it's going to streamline that. Now what you'll see here is that we did get this particular transaction stuck in the process, and it says, well, it's because this PO has not yet been received. Oh, okay, well that makes sense. But watch this. I'm going to go ahead and receive that PO. So I'm going to do a full receipt. Now, at this point, that particular transaction, so my PO has been received. If I go take a quick look at my vendor, what we'll see, I've got a lot of transactions on this guy, but it's 9, I used the back end of the PO number. You see it's on dispute, so it let me post the transaction even though it was, the PO was not yet received. If this was a prepayment situation, I could go to one of the AP functions, take it off dispute, and then cut a check for it. Else, I have now received the product, okay? So if I come back to my group here and I do a final update again, it says, okay, are we doing the same thing? Yes, we are. Now the error message changes, and it basically says, wait a minute, we got a problem. Line 1, that product on this PO is off by $10. How did it know to burp that up? If we go take a look at the vendor, under each vendor, there's a reconcile view, and it has the option, and I can't get over it, well, there. What we'll see is that it has tolerances. Zeros are not wrong. Zeros mean if you expect to be charged $5 a piece, the vendor charges you $5 and a penny. I'll take you so far, and then I'll stop you with this situation. I'll give you the warning message. The invoice will be on dispute or hold in accounts payable. You will not cut the check until you figure out how you're going to deal with this. One of the examples might be maybe you do $10 but not to exceed 2% of the overall line. So if you were $10 off on a $25 extended line, that's big. If you were $10 off on a $25,000 extension, quantity times cost, no big deal. Go ahead, let it flow. The idea is you can indicate tolerances that you're okay with, okay? And again, 0 is not wrong. If it's outside of tolerance, then it's going to put that invoice on dispute. And so this particular invoice is still on dispute. Sorry, I'm scared to go over there and change anything on that one screen, my GoToMeeting screen, because I don't know what I'll do. I'm afraid I'll drop off. So if I come back over here to my vendor inquiry, you'll see that that same invoice is still on dispute because now the problem is I'm out of whack. They charged me $6 instead of $5. What am I supposed to do about that? One final thing is typically the buyer is who has to step in and help you figure out what to do with this. So what I'm going to do is come down here. There's a report that can be generated, and it should go to the buyer. And in this case, what it will do is it will never come off of this report until such time as they come back and tell you what the problem is. But today, you have to copy the invoice. You write all over it. You tell them the PO number. Say, what am I supposed to do? The PO said 5. Looky here. It says 6 here. What am I supposed to do, Bob, the buyer? Now, this report will give them everything. It'll give them your invoice number, PO number, vendor number. More importantly, it'll give them the discount date. That's the last day I can take my discount. This invoice is on hold, therefore it will not be paid. So tell me, Mr. Buyer, what am I supposed to do? Now, in this example, it was line 3 that was off. But you'll see here it says, I am out of tolerance. You got to tell me what to do. And there's basically 3 options. I pay the vendor what he wants, updating product costs. I was wrong. The product cost should be $6 a piece. Option 2 is I paid the vendor $160, but I don't want to change product cost, so it would go to a PO variance account. Option 3, no way, Jose, I'm going to net him back down to the $150 that we agreed to. So then the second, I would have to take a second step there and get a debit in there. Credit memo, debit memo, whatever you want to call it. I know it's kind of backwards in accounts payable, but we would reduce the vendor down by $10 to say, no, I saw that it was $160, check stub will show that, and then there'll be that coming off of $10 to net him back down to $150. So the overall concept with the Invoice Center is that we're mimicking what would happen with EDI. And with EDI, again, there's no judgments made. It just pulls the information in and then says, okay, here you go. Here's your problem, children. So the AP clerk, bare minimum, just either slam dunks the invoices in if you're using this manually, Or if you're using it with EDI, they will have left to deal with these problems, the ones with error messages, which will print on a hard copy report to the buyer. The buyer gets back to me. I say final update again, and this time I'm going to say, and he's told me what to do. And again, we can talk for a long time about what all these different tolerances are. But basically, I'm going to say, I want to stick with my costs. I want you to use this PO variance account to clear that transaction, which it does. And when I come back to my vendor and refresh, that particular invoice just went off dispute 9266. And if I do all of my options here, so I'm just looking at that transaction, what you'll see here is the original GL distribution, update accounts payable for the 160. It's going to a new account called AP Trade Unmatched. That is one of the accounts that you can audit under GL report balancing. Why is there money in here? There's money in here because there's a match that is stuck, either because the PO was not yet received or because we've got an out-of-tolerance situation. Then this other transaction, it's BC, which is batch costing that came from the character side. But you'll see what it did is it took it out of AP Trade Unmatched. It completes the entry that we normally see, taking it clean out uninvoiced inventory at 150. That's the back end that AP entry usually does. And then here's that variance account. And yes, negative credit is a debit. So in my case, I said flush it. Maybe I'm going to go ahead and post debit now to get that invoice back down to 150 bucks, or maybe I'm done. Maybe I'm going to pay the guy 160, but I did not update product cost by the way I went through that Clear Me screen. So there's a lot of benefits that customers have been finding with the Invoice Center. One caveat, you cannot use AP Invoice Center below release 5.1. There were some bad bugs before 5.1. So the more current you are, the better. And I would always suggest play with this in your training company. So Gary, I think I did okay with the little phone call interruption. So if you want to not make me speaker anymore, and I think Don is going to jump in now.
Absolutely, and Don, let me turn it over to you here.
Okay.
All right, sir. You should have the screen.
Okay, great. I do have the screen. And Gary, what I want to do is I want to share, I guess there's a couple things. I want to lay out what I feel are the objectives for today, for me, and that is to try to convey to everyone that's on the call that, as Sally said, as long as you're above 61050 or 61051 or whatever that version was, you already have the ability to start using the AP Invoice Center and replace what we know as APET today. With that, along with what Sally has shown as benefits, I want to show you a number of additional benefits that we've done to take advantage of our labor, our administrative and overhead labor. So first of all, we implemented about 18 months ago APEI, and I think we were on about 61020 at the time. And we do a lot of EDI, and we implemented max capture. And one of the things that we did was we started right into the AP Invoice Center, not having any experience with it, doing it manually, and we implemented EDI, and we implemented a very high volume vendor of ours, and it caused us a lot of grief. And because of that discovery or that realization, one of the things that we would have been better off at doing was perhaps 6 months ahead of time converting all of our APET processes using the AP Invoice Center, as Sally had shown you, because there's a lot of benefits that I'm going to share with you, the reason why to do it. So if you're in a position where you're doing all of the AP manually, again, you can use the AP Invoice Center. If you are considering implementing EDI or max capture, then this is definitely the place that you have to process those transactions, or the most efficient way. So with that being said, I'm going to jump right into a demonstration in my test environment in what we've done to enhance the standard functionality. One of the things that we've done, I'm going to go back to this group, is simply by naming the group, the batch naming. We've been able to do a good job by job function to do some additional work on the screen. In Sally's demo, she showed how she was posting to the AP and then managing exceptions with reports and things like that. And I'm going to show you a different angle on the same issue. One of the things that was obvious to us was that we were creating way too much work for our AP clerks because, as Sally mentioned as well, we had to communicate to the receiving department that a PO wasn't received. A lot of times we'd be entering manual APET to find out that the PO had not been received. In addition, when we had discrepancies, we were working with the buyers in the purchasing department when there were discrepancies. So what we've been able to do is take advantage of naming our groups in such a way that we can now give access to APEI Invoice Center, so that in this instance, by naming it 810 Receive, these are orders or purchase orders that just simply are not received yet. Another feature of setups, just by setups and naming conventions, is this invoice type. So I mentioned to you that we're doing both EDI and max capture, and because of both EDI and max capture, what we do know is that we have immediate access to that AP invoice. So one of the challenges that we had in the past was having the actual invoice and having to stop at the copy machine and that sort of thing. And now what we've been able to do is make it real easy in the AP Invoice Center to know how that invoice is introduced into our system. So that's how we did it with invoice type. So a combination between group naming and invoice type. Now we're able to best manage our work center and really give control out to our receiving manager. Another thing that we did is we took a look at this reference field, and in graphical, one of the nice things is that you can just click on this column and it'll resort by that reference field. So as you see in this first line, A1 is our main warehouse, and then DO is the purchase order type, and then the purchase order number that we have associated to it. So these are some Q&Ds that we've done to take the standard SX AP batch module and get the most out of it. So our receiving clerk or our receiving manager can simply go down here and see what the invoice date is and see if, in this case, June 27th, if that's beyond what it should be, then they would be able to get a copy of that vendor invoice immediately and then contact the shipping department at our supplier and either get shipping information if it was included on the invoice, or they would be able to at least contact the vendor and they've already got the invoice in hand. So that's just one of the features that we have with the way that we've decided to name our groups. Another one that we've created is just simply an 810 bad. And these are going to be more price-related issues, and this is where, by job description, our purchasing department is working these problems. So we don't have to have a report. We don't have to develop any other mechanical means. And this is where our purchasing department then will work on these discrepancies to reconcile them and work them. So our AP clerks, if they're entering invoices manually, or we're taking advantage of EDI or max capture, just by simply defining by job description and error codes, we are conveniently moving those, those groups into the appropriate groups, and then it totally eliminated having to have copies of invoices and sharing copies of invoices. From a upper management standpoint, it's given all visibility to where we didn't have any visibility. So the accountability of the whole process makes it so much simpler because it's in this mode. What I'd like to do now is then show you, and I'm going to take a look. Now I'm in my test company, and I apologize. It is not as robust as my live company, and I do want to show you a feature that we also do here, and that is we take advantage of batch receiving. So Sally mentioned that in 10X, now we have the ability to automatically receive those dropship POs. One of the things that we do as a workaround is we do the exact same thing by taking advantage of the fact that we have the vendor's line item invoice details, and when it comes to dropships, we already know in reality we've never questioned whether the customer did or didn't get that product. So we were always running APEI and individual line items of individual POs and receiving them in. One of the things that we've been able to do is figure out how standard advanced shipping notice process and tables are working, and we've been able to build those batch records from the APEI line item details. And I don't think I'll be able to demo it here because my Q&D is still running. But what I will do is I'll just show you what this looks like. And I'll just go to an acknowledge stage, and I will change my choice over here to all POs. And this will essentially mimic what I'm doing. I changed my options here to just show more of these POs. But basically, I would do ready ASN, and that's because the program that we wrote controls the content of that ASN. And then we would just do a select all, and we would receive these POs. So what we've been able to do for drop ships is we've been able to control the receipt process to one journal per warehouse per day for drop ships, and that's done at the end of the day. So we've saved, from a time-saving standpoint, we've saved an awful lot of extra work to drill into each of those PO line items, and it's just made the whole process so much more simple. So again, I'm sorry I wasn't able to demonstrate that. My Q&D is still running behind the scenes, but in essence, I think you can see this is a standard PO receipt, and by creating what we call an ASN, an advanced shipping notice, by virtue that we have the vendor's invoice already posted or already introduced into APEI, we're able to create those in the background and essentially mimic what now we can take advantage of when we upgrade to 10X. What I do want to show you next is just this is what I presented back at TUG Connects 2013, and I just wanted to show you what the content is of this PowerPoint. This PowerPoint, I have posted it on TUG, and I'll make sure that it's in an appropriate place where everybody has access to it. But I'm just going to simply go through this demonstration of my PowerPoint so that you can get a much fuller understanding exactly specifically what we did to be able to make this work. One of the things that Sally brought up was the APSV setups. There's some specific tabs and setups that we did. Here's the invoice type where we said it's either EDI, max capture, or manually entered. And that was so that we could best manage the APEI Work Center to know how those invoices got introduced. And then some other setups. Anything with a Z in front, that's a custom, just a Q&D that I developed to make the whole thing work all together. So we've got a process of standard batch update, which does all the error checking, and then we run behind that to move the group naming with a ZZ APEGU before we do an update. One of the things in Sally's demo, she showed posting to the AP even when we had some errors. And one of the discoveries that we had, and really a preference, is that we don't do any updates, and the Q&D that I have guarantees that we don't do any updates unless it's totally clean in APEI. So that's just a preference issue, but it is something that we went through that discovery, and we really shot ourselves in the foot. and we had a whole lot of GL adjustments that we had to make as a result of it. So one of the things that we do is we first do a standard SX update, and then we go behind it to flip those groups. And then when we do an update, a final update, we only do it with the one group that's a clean job. And then here's just an outline of what the procedures are and how to do the POEI once we do this ready ASN flipping. And then we go through again what the APEGU and ZZAPEGU was, and then really a little bit more about what our naming conventions, what we decided to do with our naming conventions between 810 receive for the receiving manager, 810 bad for the pricing and product manager, and then again the final APEGU that only updates the single job that has no errors. The other thing that I just want to say is once you start using and you've decided that it makes sense to start using AP batch even in manual mode, you'll really start realizing the benefits immediately. And then the next natural step would be to take a look at what's out there in regard to max capture or any other method, EDI or any other method to build those records out. We even have some non-traditional spreadsheets that we get from some vendors that we actually just go build the APEI tables from. So there's a number of different ways that you can automate beyond just manual entry, but it really makes a whole lot of sense, and I really encourage anyone that's on this call that's not using the AP Invoice Center to really seriously consider it, because there's a whole lot of advantages in phase one, and then obviously a lot more advantages once you start implementing some additional automation.
Is this a good time for questions?
Yeah, this is Kelly. So I've got a couple questions, and I don't know, maybe we'll want to give the screen to Sally.
Yeah,
I guess it doesn't really matter who has it up, but maybe we'll need some sort of demo screen up so that some things can be pointed out to. Also, if you do have a question, feel free to submit it through the questions box that's kind of in your GoToMeeting panel. So it'll come to all of us, but I'll read the questions out loud, and Sally and Don will answer them. I actually have a question for Sally on the APEGU report that you showed. You're saying something about sending that to the buyers. Is that something that can be set up automatically? Like how could I create the AP?
Yeah, just like any report. You just do a stored report. Now, what we're missing, honestly, and I'm hoping that this gets fixed when we go to Web UI, because that's obviously where they're putting all the new stuff, is that right now you cannot limit it to, there's 18 invoices that are stuck. 3 of those are Kelly's vendors. 4 of those are Don's vendors. Right now, you basically have to send Kelly and Don the same report, and then Kelly goes through and finds his vendors, Don goes through and finds his vendors. So that's that group update screen. So you can see I can do it by group name, but what I need is a buyer range here. And so that I could say for the group or for all groups, you don't have to put a group name in if you don't want to. What we need is another one here, either a range of buyers or enter a list of buyers or enter a single buyer. And then if I've got 4 buyers, I would have 4 stored reports is the idea.
Yeah, now, and what you can use, augmenting the standard functionality that Sally just said, and then what we do with group naming conventions, then you could set up your groups to be buyer specific. And you could have your buyer, I call it bad for lack of a better term, but anything that errors out, you could, with the naming conventions, create a unique group, until you go to 10X when they've got additional functionality.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So this is just like any other report in SX Enterprise. The very, very first screen you say new stored. Then the next screen you say daily, or every hour. Because now remember, you're going to get the same information today that you'll get tomorrow if they don't tell you how to resolve the problem. So it's not like it only shows up once. So if he's gone on vacation on Tuesday and his report just goes in the wastebasket, what he sees Wednesday is still issues. Again, standard functionality, no quick and dirties here. The invoices are on hold and they've been partially entered in essence. They're in accounts payable, but they're on dispute, and we just have to figure out how to clean them. You know, again, is the vendor right? I should update product cost. Is the vendor sort of right, but I'm not going to update product cost, but I'm still going to pay him what he wants? Or, no, the vendor's dead wrong, and I'm going to net it back to what my PO said, not updating product cost. Those are really the three resolutions to it as far as what we normally see. So, next question.
Okay, great. Thank you. Don, I got a question for you here. Somebody's asking if you would be willing to provide the text of your Q&D.
Yes. Yep, I've made that available to several people already, and I'm more than happy to, you know, to make that available.
So should whoever's interested in it, should they just private message you either through email or maybe through the TUG website?
Yep, you can email me directly, dgreen@Choctaw-Kaul.com.
Okay, great. I've got another question here. Robin McGuire, she's asking, how do we get started moving from using APET to using the APEI Center? We already have had a demo of APEI, so she's just kind of wondering, I guess, you know, how do you make that transition?
Yeah, and I guess what I would go back to is just, and Sally can, you know, can comment on it, but one of the things that we did was just start at the beginning, and that's really with the APSV setups and the APEI setups, and how, you know, identify how you want to do your group naming. And again, you feel free to just use standard SX with your naming conventions, but really, you know, think about and talk about, maybe talk to some people who are using APEI already on some ideas that they have. I found that the user group has a whole lot of people that are more than happy to share their experiences and what works for them, and to make your transition a whole lot more fluid than any of ours was.
One thing I would say, first of all, you want to try this in your training company first. And then, Don, since you're driving right now, can you go back to FX and go to the Invoice Center, and then from the upper left corner where you've got File, upper left corner File, and then do Workflow?
Yep. So
yeah. This is the workflow. This guy is a mess when you first get this. I don't know why, but they just basically put all the different screens that are on the left-hand side, they put them all over there on the right-hand side, and it totally confuses everybody. Because the concept, what I did when I set it up is I said, well, what screens do I see when I go to AP entry? Then I'll do the same in AP Invoice Center, because I can always pick a screen from the left side of the screen if I want to. So under expense, for example, they had everything. They had, you know, apply credits, manual payments, terms. They had the whole schmeal over there. And when you go into AP entry, what do you see? You do the initial screen, which they're not calling here, and then you do GL. So for me, I don't have terms and add-ons in my workflow, meaning those two screens are not there. So it just says GL distribution like that. So it feels very much like AP entry. And then if you need to go change term or need to enter an add-on on an expense invoice, you can call that screen up by clicking on it on the left side. Now under the trade screen, it was even worse because there's more screens that are available. They had them all over on the right-hand side. And it just terrifies you, and you're not really sure what you're supposed to do. So the way that I had it set up, again, is to mimic AP entry. I don't have the terms one because I can always go and call up the terms one if I want to. But I do have the add-ons one. Then I have the order header entry, and then I have the PO line entry, and that's where I stop. Because typically, depending on how you're doing your differences, you won't see a GL screen. Typically, it just kind of depends how you go through it. So that's how I've got mine set up. So that would be one thing. Make sure you're in your training company, but you're going to need to do this workflow thing, and you only have to do it once to get it set up right, because that totally, my head blew off my shoulders the first time I came in here and tried to use it, because I couldn't understand why are all these stupid screens coming up. They don't make any sense for what I'm trying to do. So that would be another thing that I would take a look at. But otherwise, there should be some documentation out there. Since I've moved out of the training department, I'm really not clear on where stuff is anymore, but I know under extreme support there's documentation and you can kind of read through how you do your setups. But initially you've got to worry about your tolerances on your vendor. If you want a specific vendor tolerance under APSB, that reconcile screen, fix this workflow. Then there are some admin options that you've got to get set up correctly because of there's first of all a company level tolerance. And Don, if you go to just AO in the address box, and we'll go take a look under vendor, and then if you do, I think it's receiving or analysis, I can never remember. Yeah, so these are the tolerances at the company level. So you only really have to set up a tolerance at the vendor level if it's different or unique per the vendor, completely up to you. So this would be the company level one. And then if you go to the vendor and you set tolerances up there, there's a checkbox on that screen to say, and use me. Use my tolerances, not the ones that you see at the company level. Now, one more thing under AO, and this one it takes me I think I just looked for this one, so I think I can find it faster this time. Go to Documents, and then go to, I think it's, so this is why it always, my brain blows up. Go to Accounting. Under Purchase Orders, go to Accounting. Yeah, okay. So right here, and it's not worded terribly well, but on this screen it says Value Inventory At. This is the little box that you saw very briefly under when I did Final Update and I overrode my tolerances. It defaulted for me to the Receive option. So if he does the pull down there, there's only two options here, Receive and Match. And they could have worded this better, but Receive says stay with the cost that was on my PO receiver. So stay with my cost. So remember, my PO was issued for 5. The vendor charged me 6. I released that problem, but I left the selection at Received, which meant do not update product cost. Do not change product cost to the vendor cost. Leave it at $5. Well, then what do I do with the $10? There's a GL number. So in this, now one more screen, we're going to go to SASO. So we're going to go to SASO. Yeah, you got to type something there. So SASO, and then call up the R&D operator. Okay, trivia. Do you know what R&D stood for? Way back in time, our company was called R&D Systems, and it was not research and development. It actually stood for Rich and Diane, who were the original owners of R&D Systems back when we were in Iowa, when I was hired. So that's why that silly record is called R&D. Now, if you go to, I think it's AP, yeah, payables, then what you'll see here is the AP Trade Unmatched account, which is the guy that, at least standardly, we temporarily update on the first pass through of any invoice. So with me, the way I do it standardly with SX, any invoice that is matched, and you say go for it, I am going to post a credit to accounts payable and a debit to AP Trade Unmatched. It stays in AP Trade Unmatched if the PO is not yet received or it's out of tolerance. So that guy you can put real close to your AP Trade account. The other one below that is the AP Variance account. That's the account that I hit with a negative credit. And that was because I said, okay, I issued this at $5 a piece. He charged me $6 a piece. I'm releasing it, but I do not want you to change my product cost. So the $10 went to, bingo, that account number. That's the number I pulled it from. And so that's where, in my case, it was a debit of $10 sat. And maybe I'm done, and I'm going to cut the vendor a check for $160. Else, I go ahead and do, in essence, a credit memo, and I will credit that account, making it 0. And the debit would go to AP Accounts Payable Control to then net that back down to $150, which is what I expected to be charged by that vendor. So you've got a few setups. So this is the R&D operator. You've got to add a couple accounts for these 2 spots here. You've got an AO setting. You've got to decide if you have a tolerance other than 0, is it the match cost or the receipt cost? So if they charged you $5 and a penny and that was okay with you, where does that money go? Are you going to have it always go back to the GL? Then you leave it at receipt cost. If you want it to update product cost, then your default in AO is match cost. And again, that's going to be in play if you have a tolerance anywhere of other than 0. If all your tolerances are 0, which is not wrong, then you will always be asked, invoice by invoice by invoice, what do you want to do? I think that'll take care of some of the setup, but always try it in your training company first.
Great, thank you. So we've got another question here. Angela Richards, she asks that they have PO add-ons that were entered and posted in APEI, but were mistakenly not put on the PO before receiving. Now the add-on invoice, so now they're stuck. The add-on invoices are stuck and won't finish posting. How do they deal with that?
Well, if it's true, okay, make sure I understand that there was a PO created. So it's a trade invoice that was being posted and matched, right? So the PO, let's say, is $150, $10 add-on. I didn't know about it ahead of time. That's okay. A lot of customers don't know about it ahead of time. So then you're in the AP, I don't know if she's in the Invoice Center or if she's in AP Entry, but now she's posting the $160 invoice, which is $150 of material plus $10 of add-on. I should be able to just post that as $10 of add-on. Here's the 3 line items, $150, go for it. I don't really understand what she means by it's stuck. There's also a different kind of processing type up at the top that's called the add-on processing type, which is why I'm a little confused. But that one typically, the PO is from one vendor and like the freight is from UPS. And so the vendor that you're buying the goods from never charged you the add-on. It's a third-party vendor that charged the add-on. So I don't quite understand what the issue is. Maybe we could wait a second and see if she can type in something or.
Okay.
Because you do not have to record add-ons at time of receipt. A lot of people don't know where they are. So
she says, yes, the add-ons were third-party. They were received before
third-party add-ons. Okay, so that would mean that the processing type at the top, like he's got right there, says add-on. So that typically means that you already posted the, very possibly, the vendor invoice for buying the goods, buying the product, and I'm assuming that that's okay. But now when you're doing the processing type and the add-on, the screens are a little funky, and I am not real good at this one, but the idea is that then you are calling forward the PO or POs that you basically want to capitalize the freight charges on. So the only reason you would do a processing type of add-on is if you capitalize, in this case, freight. If the freight entry is going to go straight to your expense account, then you do not use the processing type of add-on. Now, if the problem is a bug, in other words, she's in the Invoice Center, she's tried to use the processing type of add-on, and she's having trouble with the screen movements, I'm not surprised. That's one of the reasons why we're rewriting it in the Web UI interface, because it was kind of snarky in here. So unfortunately, that you probably have to call Hotline and see if they can help you try to figure out what's going on with it. You could always try to cancel that invoice combination to see if you can start over again, but I'm not surprised that if it is truly just stuck because of screen movement, I'm not surprised. That's one of the reasons why the Invoice Center is being rewritten in Web UI, because we're starting from scratch, because it was kind of kludgy on how it was coded. And those
okay, great, yeah.
areas.
She said it was for some overseas stuff and that they do capitalize it.
Yeah. So if it's technically stuck in the Invoice Center, then I would call Hotline. Otherwise, you can try to cancel it out of that batch file and maybe try to use AP Entry for that, just because that screen, sometimes you have to kind of think it through too, but unfortunately, that's kind of the way it goes.
Great. I've got a question here from Tony Schmitz. He's asking, is there a way to delete and reverse an invoice in APEI?
Well, first of all, if the file has not yet been updated, then yes, it's a batch file. So you can recall it and tweak it, although honestly, I would probably just delete it, because again, sometimes trying to redo it, like an expense transaction would be easy, but if you've got a trade transaction with a PO or multiple POs, it might just be easier to highlight it, and then at the bottom you'll see it says delete invoice. There's a button for that. Now, if it's gone through, if it's gone at least one step through, meaning it's done the first go through and I've checked to see, is the PO received? Yes, it's received. And therefore it's in accounts payable. It's physically sitting in AP control, and therefore it's a valid invoice. Then you don't, I probably wouldn't use the Invoice Center to try to do anything with that. What you probably are going to have to do is flush it. You're going to have to, because it will be stuck here in the Invoice Center with an error message, either because of the receiving issue or because he had a tolerance issue. I would flush it. You're going to say, override tolerances, say that you want to go with the receive cost, because that means it hits GL, not product cost. And then, in essence, what you've got is an invoice in the system that has not been on dispute now, and then you go into AP entry. APET is what I would do to do a reverse invoice. Now, again, I'm not exactly sure what happens to the PO. I haven't tried that in a while. So don't know if the PO gets cleaned up and comes off of costed stage or not. But
yeah, and just to let you know, this was really the reason why we don't do anything in updates stage. So if you go to your invoice list, you can see what stage you're in. We always remain in entered stage until we have no more errors. Because you are able to get up here and you can change invoice numbers, you can change amounts, dates, terms, you can change everything that's up here while it's still in entered mode. If the nature of the problem is simply with the purchase order that you started to cost with, then if you just go here to your PO header entry, you can just remove these POs and then reintroduce the PO again. And you can look at, it'll show you again stage codes. You may have multiple suffixes that are part of this one vendor invoice, etc. But we have found this to be very user-friendly, depending on the nature of what the problem is to reconcile. And one of the things that, again, that we found to be the best way here is just to keep these invoices in entered stage and don't update them unless you have no errors. And that gives you the best of everything, because you can, as Sally said, flush it or delete it. You can actually just delete here and you could restart over.
Great. Linda Wright actually just sent me a message too. She can explain it a different way, it sounds like, if we unmute her. So I don't know, Gary, if you can easily unmute Linda, if that's possible.
Yeah, give me a second here. I'll find her.
And then just kind of for everybody to know, I've got quite a few questions here. We're bumping up against 3 o'clock, so we may want to just have like a second webinar, because I don't want to keep people too long over. So if this is useful, please let me know. We'll definitely have a second webinar soon so we can kind of get more of these questions answered.
Linda, you should be unmuted.
Okay, Gary, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. This is Linda Wright from Infor. I've been listening along today. Regarding Tony's question about deleting, there is a question as to what exactly to delete. As Don pointed out, which is a very good explanation, is something's come in through EDI, it has various PO header and line items attached to it. You can change what line items are attached to it without actually taking it out of APEI. So as he showed you there, you can either go to the PO header entry or the PO line entry and delete individual pieces and then attach the correct PO lines or PO suffixes to fix whatever is wrong. The main thing you really have to pay attention to is the status of the item, as Sally explained. There's an entered status and there's an updated status. If something is in the entered status, you can essentially delete it. There has been no impact on accounts payable or the general ledger. It's literally just sitting in this batch. And so it would be safe for you to delete with no other consequences. The key thing to remember there is if this is an invoice that came from EDI, if you delete it, how are you going to know what that information was? You've got to be prepared to either go back and retrieve that EDI file, or if you have max recall like Don, you have a way to see the vendor invoice. But make sure that you document or write down what was in that information before deleting it, so you don't have to go through a lot of trouble figuring out what it was after you have deleted it. If it's already in the updated stage, what you have to keep in mind is the updated stage means that 2 things have already happened. I've already created an AP invoice in APET, which is now sitting on dispute, waiting to finish the matching process. and I have created a general ledger journal entry which posted to accounts payable trade and AP trade unmatched. So depending on my security in APEI, I do have the ability to delete that out of here by highlighting the individual item and clicking delete. But in addition to that, I have to clean up that AP and GL. Deleting it from this screen just deletes the detail out of that APEI group. So if I go over to APIB and look at that vendor and look at transactions, there's still an open invoice sitting there waiting to be paid, probably on dispute, that's not going away because you deleted this from APEI. So separately, you've got to go to APET, do a Type 9 reversal, and reverse that invoice to close it. And when you do that Type 9 reversal, it's going to reverse the journal entry that happened. The way to make sure you're doing this delete correctly is the GLRBM matched balancing report. If you don't do the 2 steps of a delete correctly, you're going to create an out of balance situation in your GLRBM report. So it's key that you be checking that report every day and making sure your GLRBM AP trade unmatched is in balance. And if it's not in balance, one of the main reasons or causes would be that somebody has done a deletion, failing to do the 2 steps on the same day. And as I said, even if it's an updated stage, make sure you have a plan for what are you going to do to get this invoice put back in. If it came from EDI, do you have the document, do you have the information to re-enter it after you've deleted it?
Great, thanks, Linda.
You're welcome.
So it looks like I've had a couple messages that yes, we'd love to have a second webinar. So we'll go ahead and plan on doing that. I will take down all these unanswered questions because there's quite a few of them here, and that way we've got record of them, and we'll ask them on the next one. And we'll go ahead and since we're now at 301 Central, 401 Eastern, we'll go ahead and probably end the webinar now. But just know that sometime in the near future, within a month or so, hopefully, we'll have a second webinar and we'll get more of these questions answered. So I appreciate everybody coming on. And Gary, Sally, Don, anybody have any final thoughts?
No, I appreciate all the attendance, and I'd like to put a plug again with TUG. If you are not a TUG member, I'm assuming everybody is, or if you know anybody that is not a TUG member, please do encourage them to get a hold of myself or any other TUG member. These webinars are a big benefit, I hope, to everybody that's on this call and for those several thousands more that didn't make it on the call. And we'd like to get the most out of our our time spent, and overall it tickles me to know that people are getting a better return on the investment, because as we all know, in the distribution world, it's really important to always take advantage of any cost savings that you can. And this is definitely one that we've realized, and we feel very passionate that everybody else can indeed realize the same cost savings. Thanks, everybody, for joining.
Thank you, Don. Kelly, thanks for getting this organized. And Sally and Linda, thank you for all of your participation today. I did want to remind everybody that the early bird registration for Inform is going on until August 8th, and we are having a number of SIG meetings there, so we encourage anybody that can make their way to Inform to please do so. And again, we've recorded the webinar, so if anybody wants a link to this, please send either Kelly or myself an email. So thank you all for joining today.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, thanks.